What are those
Present.
medals for?
Sorry?
Your medals.
Yes, thank you. I spent 14 years as a wrestler. I was competing
Right.
as a wrestler, so my background is a sport thing as well. So it carries me through the life. Everything that I've learned and developed, I'm just using with myself today. I no longer compete professionally, and but everything's here. I'm guessing it's just like with your Navy experience.
Yeah, well, I think sports has a lot to teach the
Exactly.
leadership coaches. I think the way we think about it is learning leadership is like learning a language, which is much more like learning a sport than learning something theoretical like history or something like that. And that if you really want to be good, you really have to practice it, and you have to actually speak the words and see what happens.
Yeah, your second book, Leadership is a Language, was like, the first one was even incredible, David. And when I think about you, and to give a clear picture to someone and to understand what really intent-based leadership is all about, I always go back to your quote, to your vow actually that you've made to yourself when you took over Santa Fe, that you will never ever give an order apart from the ultimate one. And to someone who hasn't come across your books just yet, or haven't consumed any of your content, it sounds crazy, insane. In fact, for me, it's almost impossible unless you know exactly what you mean, how to get there.
Yeah.
So before we unpack that, your concept of leadership as language and intent-based leadership, like, how did you arrive to the point when you had to make this vow to yourself? What led you to this brave decision?
Yeah. So the short story is, I was a Navy submarine commander, and I came up through the ranks on the strength of making decisions and getting people to do things, which for me, I didn't realize there was any other way of interacting. And this idea that we have to control other people is built into this, into our visions of what leadership is about.
Yes.
And when I got to when I was assigned to be a submarine captain, at the very last minute, I got shifted to a submarine that I didn't know the technical details on, and I was the wrong person to be telling people what to do. And so I made a commitment to my team not to give any orders, because here's what happens when the most senior person, the CEO, or the boss or the captain gives an order, it's very hard for the team to say it's not the right thing to do. Even the hint that the CEO or the captain wants to do something is usually strong enough to make people do things. Like sometimes we say these in an objective. So when the CEO of Volkswagen, Winterkorn, says, "Hey, we're going to build this diesel engine, and it's going to have high performance and also have very low emissions," it was physically a very, very difficult task, but the team wants to make their bosses happy, so they try and do it. In this case, the only way to do it was to cheat. And the problem is, it's this whole structure of coercion. Everything, it's a fundamentally coercive approach. And it's stressful because we're trying to control other people, and other people are trying to control us. And so we have all these toxins in work. In the United States, one estimate said that these stress in the workplace costs $223 billion a year in turnover, not to mention healthcare costs, and it's the fifth leading cause of death in the United States. So, and then we say, well, what you need to do is tell people what to do better. And that's just like putting lipstick on a pig. It's not going to make a difference. What's going to make a difference is you got to get out of the business of trying to control people. So from a very practical basis, that's what you want to do. But the other thing is, from a psychological basis, you don't want the most senior person in the organization making decisions, because what happens is their egos attached to the decision, and then it becomes very difficult to dispassionately evaluate the decision. So the most resilient organizations are organizations where the most senior person only has a brake pedal. The tier below them is saying go, 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 go. And the senior person doesn't need to make things go. But since we become impatient, we haven't trained people, we're not willing to trust that they have the same sense of urgency that we do. We always step in and we sabotage that sense of ownership by trying to tell people what to do.
It's a tough one because that's how we've been raised, trained to behave. That's what the role models that you've mentioned we've seen, and we just copy it almost and going through it. And as you've mentioned already right at the beginning, that leadership is a language, and it resonates with me so much. But I also learned from your second book that it's not only about the language, what we're saying and how we're saying, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more in a minute, but also the ratio. And you broke it down really nicely with what happened at Alfaro. Could you share the story a little bit about and the concept of the ratio that of the language and how much airspace we're taking the conversation?
Yeah. So the story on the Santa Fe, on the submarine, was that all we did was we changed the words that we'd said to each other. I wasn't in control of a lot of things that leaders are typically spend a lot of energy on, which is who's on their team and what positions they're in and all that kind of stuff. I was almost fortunate to be not in control of those things because I didn't worry about it. I didn't spend any energy on that. I spent all my energy on how we interacted, which was simply how did we ask questions? How did we run meetings? How did we talk to each other? It was all it was. We made these very simple tweaks in the language. For example, we stopped saying they, we just said we. When we refer to people in different ranks or in different departments, instead of saying, well, they ordered the wrong part, we would say we ordered the wrong part. Yes. And these had hugely powerful impacts. And the submarine went from the worst performing to the best performing, had the worst morale to the best morale, and created more submarine commanders than any other submarine. And so I was really intrigued about how powerful language could be. And the question was, can you look at the language of a team and can you make a prediction? Is this a resilient team that's going to make good, creative, innovative decisions, or a fragile team? And so we looked at all these transcripts of industrial accidents and sometimes where things went well. And it turns out there are some patterns that are detectable. One pattern is if you simply count the number of words that everybody says on a team. So you have a meeting, you have 5 people, and you're going to make a decision. Should you launch a product? Should you launch a new product or not? Let's say the new product is 737 MAX software. And in those situations, what we saw, the pattern was that the number of words you said followed the salary distribution. So the person with the greatest salary said the most words and on down. And it turns out that ships have black boxes like airplanes. We weren't interested in summaries of meetings. We were interested in the actual transcripts of meetings. And so a lot of these, what happens in corporations is you don't actually have the transcript, but for airplanes and ships, you do get the transcripts. And so the good thing about a ship's transcript is they're bigger teams and it goes for longer. And there was a container ship, 800-foot long container ship in 2015, left the coast of Florida during hurricane season, sailed into a hurricane and sank. All 33 people perished. This was the Alfaro, and it was a tragedy. Yeah. And it's like, well, how could that happen? Did they know it was there? Yes, of course they did. They were talking about it. And since the government was able to find the ship and recover the black box, we know what those team members said to each other as they were trying to convince themselves to turn or not turn away from what their original planned course was, which took them through the trajectory. And when you look at what are the forces that prevented them from just turning and going around? And one of the patterns that you see in their language is the captain always said the most number of words. When the captain was on the bridge with bridge team, so captain, officer, crew member, typically, in every case, the captain said the most number of words, followed by the officer, followed by the crew member. So this is a 100% for this particular team. This was a 100% predictable structure.
Yeah.
And even if it's not that bad, what we do see often in meetings is the people who are lower in the totem pole, although they're probably closer to the work, and the people who think differently from the group end up suppressing their voice. And so the group is deprived, the decision making of the group is made without knowing what everybody knows, without knowing what everybody sees. And this is inherently a fragile process. So the goal of leaders in a meeting is not to build consensus. That's deliberately reducing dissenting and outlying opinions. The goal is the opposite. You want to invite as many voices into the conversation as possible and level that team language, that share of voice as a team language coefficient.
So how do we make sure that the people who are paid the most and they believe they had to have the biggest input because eyes are on them and are the most senior or experienced person in the room, how do we flip the script by tweaking simple things? Because that's what I love about your methodology, David.
Yeah.
You said it yourself. It's the simplest thing to do and the most difficult thing to do at the same time.
Yeah.
And you're inviting us and you're showing us the simple things that we can change and tweak to flip the whole script upside down, to get you from being this commander who gives the orders to the commander who almost never gives the orders, right?
Yeah.
So what are the simple things that we could do to change that ratio to start off with?
Yeah. So, for example, when we ask questions, we tend to say things like, is it going to work? Is it safe? Are you sure? And these are binary questions that really put the person, the other person in a box, because they can only answer yes or no by the nature of the question. And you're almost making them take responsibility for the future, which is an impossibility. Will the stock make money? Will the stock market go up? I don't know. You could say, what's the probability? So the trick is start the question with the word what or how. We like how. How sure are you? How likely is it? How confident are you in this decision? Rather than, are you sure? And what happens then, so number one, you're going to get more information from them. It'll be more inviting for them to speak up. And number two is, if you just go back to that word count. If I say, are you sure? And the person says, yes, then they're only saying one word. So it's not inviting them to say a lot of words. But I say, well, how sure are you? And they say, 95%. I say, well, tell me, like, what's behind that? Or what are you seeing that's causing you to come up with that number?
Right.
Now I'm inviting them, and then they start talking. So what happens is that those questions that start with the word what or how or where or who. But if you just want to think of one word, I would just say start the question with the word how. They naturally balance the word count in group. And so they're naturally a resilient, it's a natural activity for resilience and agility.
It becomes natural. It's almost as if it will happen organically because there's a natural flow behind it. You're not creating this cohesion that you're talking about. It's now we are having a conversation. And I'll tell you something, David. I took on that challenge.
What happened?
Those how. I'll tell you what happened. It's bloody difficult. It sounds easy. It's difficult. And I'm testing it with my kids. So I've got 16 years old Nathan and 9 years old Xavier. And I just keep on falling into this trap of saying, are you sure? I'm like, no, Raf, how sure are you? Right. And it's like, damn, those old habits dying so hard. But until somebody just lights the spot on that and says, hey, this is the implication of what you're saying. You're like, oh, right. Genuinely, by flipping the script, it triggers different feelings and emotions almost, isn't it? Not only just gets the conversation in a different direction, but also creates a different feeling and vibe behind the question asked and what's your intention actually behind it. And that's really important. It changes the perception of your intention behind the question for me. I love that you're practicing. I love that your kids are your guinea pigs.
And I love that you're aware enough to say, I'm noticing that my programming, and now here's the reason why. Because in the industrial age, you wanted to get people to do stuff. So you weren't really, so it wasn't about inviting different opinions. It was about getting people to do my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why we would ask questions that way. And it's just not helpful. So I'm interested, like, have you noticed, how do your kids react when you ask, how sure are you versus are you sure? How are their reactions different?
First of all, it's a shocker almost, because they're not used to being asked that question. And
Yeah.
my goal, my intention is not only to improve myself as a feedback coach, as an individual, as a person, but expose my kids and everyone around me to think about stuff differently, to show them there's a different way from the early age. And again, I don't have to reinvent the wheel. All I have to just work hard in changing those words.
Yeah.
But then first there's that confusion. But then it's just like, well, I'm not sure really what you're asking me, because you're making me work harder.
Yeah.
But by doing so, you actually coaching. I'm coaching my kids to actually give a meaning to their answers rather than just come up with, I don't know, simple. That's something that really.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you a story about that. We would say, so over and over again, we say, how sure are you? How confident are you? How likely is this assumption to be true? And you can think of many, 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 many examples. How ready are we to launch the product? How likely is there to be a security violation? So you can think of many examples for this. And we would use these cards, and our numbers were 1, 5, 20, 50, 80, 95, 99. And so, and the reason is because you really want to differentiate extreme emotions. So there's a big difference between 1 and 5, not so much of a difference between 60 and 70. So that's why there's none of those cards. It's just 1, 5, 20, 50, 80, 95, 99. So the first thing is, there's no 0, no 100. You don't get to say, I'm 100% sure that this is going to work, or I'm 0% sure this is going to work. And so it helps people think probabilistically. And the second thing is, and we had a big argument about this, because we would ask questions, how ready are we to launch the product? And someone from, say, HR would say, well, I don't have any idea. And so we had a big argument that when people wanted a question mark, they just said, well, I'm just going to throw out a question mark. But the problem is, it's a cop-out. A question mark is a cop-out. They probably know more about it than, so let's just take the person in HR. They hear people talking in the lunchroom. They are seeing transfers away from the team, out of the team, and maybe they're doing exit interviews, or maybe they're seeing requests for people to join the team, or maybe they're finding it's hard for, and so they have a pretty good intuitive sense about the product.
Yeah.
I'm guessing, like when Boeing launched the 787, they had a rollout ceremony saying it was going to fly in 3 months, and it was over 2 years later. I'm guessing people in HR had a gut feel that the project wasn't on track for a 3-month rollout, because you see all these little indications, and then you get a sense. So what you want is more data.
Yeah.
What you want is more. I mean, there's a 50. So the 50 is sort of the cop-out card. Like, I don't know, 50.
But the question mark also for me would just open the doors to give that lazy answer, a safe answer, without thinking too much, without, again, also in making me really think behind my answer. If I just throw a question mark, I'm not sure. I just don't know. But if you really put a grade onto it, and on your scale, then it makes me, okay, I am 80% sure because of that. The remaining 20% is, those are the questions that I have with myself, and from my experience, this is what happened in the past, and I'm worried that this is likely going to, happen again. So I love that scale.
Exactly. You got to get people comfortable with making hunches, expressing hunches. The reason why they want to put a question mark, is not because they don't know. It's because they don't want to be held accountable for a number that they might put out, which means it's not a psychologically inviting environment for people to share. So a question mark is a good test. The desire of a lot of people to put out question marks is generally negative indication of a healthy team dynamic.
Yeah. When I was reading actually about the coercion part, it took me right back to Liz Wiseman's book when I read about accidental diminishers. And I thought, wow, I am accident without knowing creating this coercion rather than commitment. It's not my intention.
Yeah.
It's just the way I show up in real life and how I communicate, again, back to that language. And I'm curious whether, is it just me, or is it the minority of people that is, or most of us perhaps are guilty of it, that our language is creating this coercion and without intending it?
Yeah, well, I think most of us are doing it. I love Liz Wiseman's book, Multipliers. And again, when I read that thing about accidental diminishers, I just cringe, like, well, how many times am I doing that a day? I got to tell you, as an author, all books start as self-help, at least for me. Mm-hmm. And so this book about leadership as language, this book about language was, I was trying to figure out, why am I asking questions? Why am I saying, are you sure? Well, as opposed to, how sure are you? Why am I saying, so guys, I really think we should launch a product, right? Does that make sense? I'm just like, those little phrases are really they're the little micro-coercions, because it's just, again, saying, well, you better not disagree with me. You better sign up. You better get on board. You better be a good team player, as opposed to what I'm trying to train myself to ask. And what we would do on the submarine would be things like, let's say the team made a decision, or I had to make a decision, which even though I would try and avoid it. Okay, we've talked about it, guys. We could go north. We could go south. We're going to go north. How could this go wrong? What am I missing? If this is a bad idea, in 12 hours we realize this was a bad idea, what would be the most likely causes? And you ask questions like that, which make it easy for people to share why they think it's bad, as opposed to, oh yeah, I heard you. I heard your dissenting voice, which is really code for, I didn't hear your dissenting voice. Because if you really heard their voice, you wouldn't feel the need to say, oh, I hear you. They would know innately that you heard them. So just hear them. Absolutely. And then you don't have to say, oh, I heard, or trust me. That's another one I hate. Yeah. Oh, trust me. Okay, so what does that mean? That means you're really getting a sense the team doesn't trust you. Why? Because you aren't being trustworthy.
I like how you're curious with your communication, because you've mentioned the part about does that make sense? And that's my pet peeve as well. When I hear that, especially several times, I feel like you questioning my intelligence, the level of my intelligence, and you're patronizing me. And so I'm already not quite comfortable in the conversation. Now I'm questioning your intention, and this is not what I want.
Right. Does that make sense? So, okay, now what is that? A test or whatever? Like, oh yeah. And how many times you go,
and in a team meeting, who's gonna say no? It doesn't. Everyone says, yeah, it makes sense, because I don't want to look like a stupid one, right?
Right. The CEO stands up and she says, so blah, 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 we're going to launch the software next week. Does that make sense?
Exactly. Yeah. So I want to just quickly spend a little bit more time around how we communicate, the small examples, because when I read your first book and you said, hey, ask your team, so your team should come to you and says, I'm intent to do X and Y versus can I do X and Y? And a small shift in the language really made me also start questioning, how am I turning up into conversation? And how am I communicating? So I'm triggering a certain behavior, and the behaviors that I want with my team, they are present there. So you've mentioned already one. My pet peeve also is when I see the emails, and it's similar that you said, is one that, like, you didn't send me the email. Right. So from my perspective, when I look at how I provided feedback and what feeling I create within my team, I look at that example of yours, like, you haven't sent me the email. Okay, so what sort of feeling does it trigger? And how can we do that better? And there's a quick story that I want to share with you, because it's literally just happened today that is related to it. Just before this interview, I exchanged some emails with Kathy just to make sure that everything's fine with this podcast. And she asked me this question: do I have all the bio and everything that I need? And I wrote the sentence and I said, yes, I have everything that I need. And I paused myself and thinking, there is a better way of communicating it. And what I call is passive feedback, very similar to what you do, but I call it a passive feedback, where I'm communicating without intentionally communicating with it. So I erased that sentence and I said, you have provided me with everything that I need. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a small change. It's one sentence difference.
I love that. I saw your email and I said, that is a pretty good response. But you think about it. So Kathy's question, those kind of set you up to take the traditional path. Do you have everything you need? Yes.
Yeah.
No.
Yes.
As opposed to, what are you missing, or what do you need? What else do you need? Something more open-ended like that.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's just kind of,
yeah. How are we doing in giving you everything you need? Something like that. But I think you're right. So for example, I see this in the movies sometimes, and it's the worst example, which is sort of what your thing reminded me of. When someone says, so imagine you're on some kind of a comedy, you're on a ship, and someone says, hard left rudder, and the captain says, hard left rudder, and then the team member says, got it. Well, got it means nothing. You have no idea what they got. What you would actually say is hard left rudder. So you say, this is what I think you're telling me to do, hard left rudder. I'm saying, if I say, oh, I got it, I don't know what you have got.
Yes.
And so that's
sort of repeating.
So teams, resilient teams. So this is what I'm sorry, I jumped on you, but basically these things, which we think are sort of common phrases and helpful, are not. And so what really, really good teams, the most, and you can be an average, mediocre, whatever team, but you're not going to be the pinnacle. You're not going to be Olympic varsity level, whatever it is that you do, operating a nuclear power plant, run an oil well, design an electric vehicle. You won't be the pinnacle of human performance if you use those old tired phrases.
Right. So time is very short now. So very, very quickly, David, if I'm that, because I always imagine myself when I talk with my guests, and I always put myself in this position when I was a junior manager and I didn't have much support around me to develop me towards being a coaching leader. But I just feel it, like I need to do better. And let's say, you know what? I pay attention to my language. How do I communicate and come across? What are the 2 or 3 things that you would advise me as that junior manager that could start shaping the behavior of my team just by tweaking this language? We've used few examples, but where would be my starting point instead of the best advice that you could give me and send me on my way to become a great leader?
Well, I would start so for meetings that you're running and one-on-one conversations, start the question with the word how. Stop asking, don't ask any binary questions. For anything involving the future should not be a binary question. You can say, did you watch the football game? But even that, you could say, well, how much time did you spend watching the football game? But binary questions are shortcuts, which sometimes are useful, but when it comes to making a decision about the future, generally aren't. That's number one. Number two, when you're running a decision meeting, always vote first, then discuss it. And almost every team does the opposite.
Right.
So, hey, let's talk about it. Is the product ready to go? Blah, 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 blah. Okay, now let's take a vote. Launch, don't launch. This is the wrong way to do it. This is the way you'll get. What you're going to get is groupthink, conformity, and everything like that. So don't give people a lecture about being individuals and then run the meeting the wrong way. Just run the meeting. Say, okay, before you contaminate anyone with the conversation where you're going to figure out who thinks what, let's all vote and slide a card out on the table. How ready are we to launch the software next week, or how confident, or some kind of question like that. Then you look for the 1s and the 5s on one end, and you invite them to speak, and the 95s and 99s on the end, you invite them to speak. Another thing is listen for the word they. So I had personal story. I had the floors in my house redone. They're actually still being redone. And it didn't really go very well. And I was talking to one of the contractors, and I was pointing something out, and he said, "Well, they blah 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 blah." He was talking about another person on the team. Now, what does that signal?
Wow.
They did this.
Yes.
There's no sense of teamwork. There's no sense of we're in this together. It's this sort of blaming culture. And so what you want to do is just replace the word they with we, and try and grow. Like there's going to be a we, and then it ends at some point.
Yeah.
And really dysfunctional teams, it may be just one person. That's it. And then, so maybe it's a small team of 5, maybe it's 10. You see if you can get the we to encompass a team of 150 people. But just change the language, and just when people come up. So that's another. And the other thing is always control yourself, control your own language. Stop giving people lectures about, well, you should speak up. Just ask questions and make it easy for them to speak up.
So true. So very quickly to wrap up those few ideas, you mentioned at the beginning of those few changes about football game, how much time you've spent on it. Those are the perfect opportunities for you guys to practice at home when you speak to your family members, to your friends, because you're building and changing different habit of communicating. It will just follow through in the workplace. So you don't have to start with the workplace when it's a little bit maybe uncomfortable for you, or you think people will start judging you, thinking what you're doing. Do what I do. I practice, because I'm working as a feedback coach, but I'm practicing most of the things that I do at home first to change and rewire the old dying habits and start asking questions differently. And that will just then follow through it a lot better, a lot differently. And the last thing that you've mentioned, the difference between we and they, it literally reminds me when you hear the ongoing battle of marketing and sales team. They didn't do that. They didn't do this. In hospitality, you've got kitchen and floor, like back of house. They did. You shouldn't say, I'm absolutely with you, like, they as in marketing team didn't do that. It's like, we haven't executed on a certain strategy, or we haven't launched it in the right time, or we haven't looked in the data in the right place. Of course, it was part of the marketing job, but there's no need to put that finger on people, because you only... And again, I call it passive feedback. The passive feedback that you're sending here is you saying it's okay to blame others within my organization. That's basically what it is. It's tacit agreement to blame everyone else when you're allowing your team to say, hey, they didn't do that, or you saying they didn't do it, or my marketing team let me down, or my personal assistant didn't provide me the information that I needed. Well, maybe you haven't followed through properly. I don't know. But I absolutely love simple things, 4 steps. All done and dusted. The very last question, David, if you don't mind, this is a question that I always ask, and I'm so curious to learn. Who was or is the best coach-like leader that you work with or for throughout your life?
Oh my gosh, so many. First of all, I had a tremendous experience with Dr. Stephen Covey, who visited the summer.
Wow.
My boss, when I went over to the Santa Fe, my boss was a guy named Marquet, who put me there. And he gave me the tools. He pointed me in the right direction, and he left me alone. He incubated us while we were having all these struggles. He did a tremendous job. But we're seeing so many people in business. In the UK, we have different police forces that are working in this way, where actually they're reducing crime as a result of allowing the sergeants and the people out interacting with the community to just do more thinking, as opposed to just doing some program thing about what they're told. Ash Farrington in the middle of the UK is one of those guys. We have big companies where leaders are stepping forward, and I'm learning tips and tidbits from them as much as they maybe are learning stuff from me. But the thing that's just remarkable to me as I travel around the world is that if you go to the basics of what people want from work, whether you're in China, you're in Bangalore, you're in London, or you're in the middle of Kansas, are all, to me, remarkably uniform. People want something that has meaning, something where they can have impact, something where they can think, and something where they can be their true selves without having to wear masks or pretending, and not be afraid to express what they're really thinking, and then take those toxins home. And they want to be writers of their own story. And we steal that from people when we say, no, you're going to sit here, you're going to do this, you're going to deliver this software by this date, and it's going to have all these features, and here's the team you're going to do it with. And we just steal the opportunity for people to be fully human, which is a tragedy.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, David, for your time. I know time is precious for you, and you have to go, guys. I'm going to link all the content that you can link with and learn from David, the books, the Internet-Based Leadership Institute content. There's loads of videos out there with David explaining and breaking down to the simplest possible bits the knowledge and the leadership tips and advices, guys. So I'm going to link it all down there. And wow, what a conversation, David. And the last thing I want to say thank you for influencing my life so much. Your first book, it just genuinely pushed me in a completely different direction. I started questioning myself in a simple manner. What can I do better and differently, and show with my language different in the workplace? And wow, I could talk about it for hours, actually. So thank you for giving me the tools and inspiring me. Both things are important. Giving me the tools and inspiring me to be different in the workplace, to show up differently. So thank you very much for that, David. You're incredible.
Cheers.
Thank you. Alrighty, guys. So that will be it. End of the. Let me just remove. Hold on, I'm just killing it all.